Your mom is being unreasonable again. That's what he said. Tuesday morning, March 14th, 6:47 a.m. And I was standing in our kitchen wearing yesterday's clothes with a cold coffee mug in my hand. The light was coming through the window at that angle that makes everything look like it's been filtered through regret. I wasn't being unreasonable. My mother had called the night before. Not angry, just tired. Asking if I could check the storage room at my childhood home. She was moving, downsizing at 68, and she found a box labeled with my name in that careful cursive she used for everything. She couldn't remember what was in it. Neither could I. I'll get it when we drive out there this weekend, I said. He was already showering, already becoming the version of himself that existed for everyone else. The patient one, the understanding one, the guy whose wife seemed to need constant reassurance about things that didn't matter. Except his tone shifted something inside me. Not dramatically. Not like I suddenly saw him clearly. It was smaller than that. It was the realization that he'd been doing this for years. This particular dismissal where my need became her irrationality became our problem. I can't explain why that mattered until you know what was in the box. I was married to the kind of man people describe as good. Not exciting. Not passionate. Good. He remembered anniversaries. He picked up my favorite coffee. He told our friends I was so smart, in a way that suggested surprise. He volunteered twice a month at the youth center. He had a carefully curated Instagram where he posted about mental health awareness and the importance of checking in on your people. His people. Never my people. Let me show you how this worked. 2 years ago, my best friend Sarah was going through a divorce. Really going through it, the kind where your hands shake when you check your email and you can't eat anything warm. I wanted to take her on a weekend trip. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere she didn't have to pretend. That's nice, he said. But we already have plans. We had brunch plans. Tentative brunch plans with his colleague and his colleague's wife, which we discussed maybe doing sometime in April. April was 3 months away. Sarah needed help in February. But we literally just committed to this, he said. We had not. But his discomfort with my flexibility, my willingness to rearrange, my desire to show up for someone in crisis, that was the real issue. Because rearranging meant proving he wasn't the flexible one. It meant being honest about what actually mattered. He went to brunch alone. I stayed with Sarah for 3 days in a small cottage upstate. And the first night she slept through until morning because she didn't have to hold herself together. This happened in 100 ways. My sister needed help with her newborn. He had a work project he couldn't postpone. Even though he was literally scrolling through Twitter when I asked. My father had a health scare. He reminded me that his mother had abandoned him as a child, which I understood as, my trauma is bigger than your need to check on your parent. His friend from college called struggling with sobriety. That's really sad, he said. But it's not our responsibility, in a way that made our land hard, made it clear whose world had borders and whose didn't. I noticed. I definitely noticed. But I also didn't know how to say it without sounding like I was attacking his character. And he'd gotten very good at the vulnerable confession before you could even lodge a complaint. I know I have trouble with emotional availability, he'd say. My parents really messed me up. I'm in therapy. He was in therapy. Once a month. Sometimes less. The pattern wasn't sharp. It was soft. It was him finding reasons why my emotional labor was generous and his was a constraint. Why his boundaries were healthy and mine were people-pleasing. Why his need to protect his peace was wisdom and my need to show up for people was exhausting. And I started to believe it. I started to believe that I was too much, that wanting to be present for people mattered was actually a defect, that my instinct to help people I loved was something I needed to work through with a therapist too. I didn't get a therapist. Instead, I made myself smaller. I said maybe when people asked for help. I checked with him first, even for things that had nothing to do with him. I apologized for caring. And he loved this version of me. He was so proud of my growth. The box was supposed to be nothing. My mother said it was probably old school photos, maybe some journals. Whatever it is, I don't need it, she'd said in that gentle way she had of letting me know she'd already moved on and I was welcome to join her. I drove out there that Saturday alone. He had a work meeting he couldn't move. Suddenly, Saturday meetings were non-negotiable. The drive was 3 hours, and I spent it in a state of numb efficiency, good music, good coffee, the kind of blank mind that comes from not allowing yourself to think about anything that matters. My childhood home was already half empty. My mother had already stripped it of most of her presence, and it had that eerie quality of a space that no longer held anyone. The storage room was in the basement, where it had always been. So I thought about the specific moment I'd started adjusting myself to fit inside his comfort zone. I thought about Sarah still in that cottage, still carrying that weekend alone. I thought about the 100 small times he'd convinced me that my instinct to care was the problem, not his refusal to match it. I texted him, "Found something. Need to talk when I get home." He texted back immediately, as he always did with me, the person whose emotional labor had become so conditional. Everything okay? Everything was not okay. Everything had never been okay. And the thing was, I knew exactly what he'd say when I told him. I knew he would be gentle about it. He would probably cry. He would talk about his childhood. He would ask me not to make this about him while making it entirely about him. He would say I was reading too much into a simple comment. And slowly, the way it had happened with everything else, I would become the person who was overreacting, who was bringing up old wounds, who couldn't just let things go. I didn't tell him immediately. I came home, made dinner, kissed his neck the way he liked, and I sat with the knowledge like someone holding their breath underwater. 3 days. Thursday evening, I asked him to sit down. Actually asked him, which is what people do before they say something that changes the shape of a relationship. He looked concerned in the way someone might look concerned if you were about to deliver difficult medical news. He was already preparing his response. "My mother was married before she married my father," I said. "A long marriage. 7 years. She left because he isolated her from people she loved by making her feel guilty for caring about them. He convinced her that her relationships were the problem, that her emotions were exhausting, that his comfort was more important than her connections." I watched him listen. I watched him understand where this was going. "So," he said carefully, "she was in an abusive relationship." "Yes. And you're bringing this up because I'm tired of feeling guilty for wanting to see my family. I'm tired of checking with you before I help my friends. I'm tired of apologizing for caring about people." He didn't move. He didn't get defensive, which was the problem. If he'd gotten defensive, it would have been easy. Instead, he became the hurt person, the misunderstood person, the man whose wife was comparing him to an abuser. "I'm not your stepfather," he said quietly. "I know. I would never intentionally isolate you. I think you're doing it unintentionally. And I think that might be worse because we can't even name it. Here's the thing about standing up for yourself in a relationship with someone who's good at being gentle. You become the villain in the story. You become the ungrateful person, the one who can't see how much he tries, the one who's comparing him to something horrible when all he's ever done is love her." He stood up and went into the bedroom. I sat in the living room. 20 minutes later, he came out with his eyes red. "I think I need space to process this," he said. I knew what this meant. It meant I would wait for his processing. It meant he would emerge from it with something I'd said being reframed as a misunderstanding. It meant I would spend the next week walking on the careful ground of not pushing him to deal with what I just handed him. It meant the problem was going to become my problem. "I'm not waiting for you to process this," I said. The quiet that followed was the kind that has weight. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I can't keep managing your emotional comfort while I'm disappearing. I'm saying that you've spent 7 years making me small, and I don't think you even noticed you were doing it. That's not fair." "It's not about fair. It's about what's true." He stood there and I could see him running through his options. He could cry harder. He could bring up his mother again. He could remind me of all the things he'd done for me, all the ways he'd shown up. He could do what he'd always done, which was make himself the person who needed comforting. I got up instead. I went into the bedroom and started putting things into a bag. He followed me. He stood in the doorway like someone who just realized he was no longer in control of the narrative. "Where are you going?" "I don't know yet." "For how long?" "I don't know." I packed deliberately, not angrily. with the kind of clarity that comes when you finally stop trying to make someone understand. I packed like I was making a choice, which I was. I packed like I was choosing myself, which I was. And when I zipped the bag, I didn't feel better. I felt lighter, which is not the same thing. I felt lighter and also terrified, which is the actual feeling of integrity. I called Sarah on the drive to the hotel. She didn't ask where I was going or why. She just said, "Do you need me?" And for the first time in a long time, I said yes without apologizing. I stayed in a hotel room for 2 nights. Alone. I ordered room service that I didn't have to run by anyone. I watched television that didn't require someone else's emotional validation. I called my mother and told her everything, and she listened like she was hearing the end of a very long story she'd started. "What do you want to do?" she asked. "I don't know." "That's okay. You don't have to know yet." He texted constantly. At first he was gentle. "I miss you. We should talk." Then he was injured. "I don't understand why you're being like this." Then he was vulnerable. "I'm in pain and I need you." Then he was angry, which was the most honest he'd been in years. "You're destroying our marriage because of something your stepfather did." I didn't respond. And the non-response was its own response. By day 4 there was silence. I half expected him to move on to the next thing, which was to begin the work of making this my fault retroactively, of telling his friends that I'd left him, that I was unstable, that I'd carried my mother's trauma into our relationship. I was right. That did happen. But not before something else. He showed up at Sarah's apartment where I was staying. Actually came to her door with his face doing something genuine, which I almost didn't recognize. "I fired my therapist," he said. "What?" "The one I saw once a month." He told me that my boundary setting was important, but that I needed to examine why every boundary looked like pushing someone away. That I was using therapy language to justify being unavailable. I fired him immediately because he was wrong. But he was right. And I'm tired. I didn't fall into his arms. I didn't say, "It's okay, we can work on this." I didn't make his revelation into our reconciliation. "Okay," I said. "I don't know how to change." "I know." "Are we ending?" "I don't know. And the truth is I still don't. Not entirely. What I know is that I moved back home with my mother for 6 months. What I know is that I started saying no without explanation. What I know is that I called Sarah when I wanted to and I didn't ask permission. What I know is that I made a friend named Marcus who was kind in the way that doesn't require me to become smaller. The marriage is still. Here's the specific moment I'm thinking about right now. Last month I was at a coffee shop, the one near Sarah's apartment, and my mother called. She'd fallen, nothing serious, but she needed help for a few days. I got up immediately. I paid for my half-empty coffee and I drove there. And I didn't text him first. I didn't ask if it was okay. I didn't apologize. I just went. That sounds small. Probably sounds small to you unless you've ever had to apologize for loving someone. Unless you've ever framed your care as a character flaw. Unless you've ever confused gentleness with love and called it a lesson in humility. If you have, then you understand why that moment mattered. I'm not going to tell you that leaving was the right choice because I still don't know if it is. I'm not going to tell you that he was a monster because he wasn't. He was a man who learned how to be gentle from people who forgot to teach him how to be present. He was a man who confused the idea of emotional health with the performance of it. He was a man, in other words, and that's both more complicated and more familiar than we like to admit. What I will tell you is this. The box my mother kept all those years wasn't about warning me. It was about trusting me to recognize my own red flags. It was about believing that I was smart enough to understand that someone doesn't have to scream at you to make you smaller. They just have to keep rearranging what you feel until you can't locate yourself anymore. I've spent a lot of time being angry at her for not telling me that outright. And I've spent more time being grateful that she didn't, because that would have been her trauma living in my body, and I needed to find my own. I needed to walk my own path to understanding that love isn't supposed to feel like apology. If you've ever felt guilty for wanting more than someone was willing to give you, not more attention or money or grand gestures, but more presence, more reciprocity, more of their actual self, you understand what I'm talking about. If you've ever let someone make you believe that your need to be seen was selfish, that your expectation of being matched was unrealistic, that your care was a burden and not a gift, then you know what the box taught me. You are not too much. And the people who insist that you are, the ones who say it gently and cry about it and make it your job to comfort them for their discomfort with you, they are not the standard by which you measure your own worth. The box is gone now. I threw it away, kept the letter. And on the hard days when I wonder if I made a mistake, I remember standing in my childhood basement and finally seeing my own future. I remember choosing not to write the same ending that someone else had. I remember very simply that I was enough before he loved me. And I'm still enough now.